Awesome, Kaylee. Thanks so much. Right now, we're bringing on the one, the only Alan Adler for our weekly Truck Tech edition. And Alan, I'm excited about this one. We're talking about a really something that's impacting drivers and really some everyday driving folks on the road. I see a lot of Lyft drivers, Uber drivers with us, but getting it started off with cameras. Alan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Anthony. Good to be here. Yeah, it's interesting. This is not something I cover a lot, but I've been aware of the issue. And being out in San Diego at the ATA Management Conference and Exhibition this week, it felt like a good subject to sort of walk the floor and talk to people about, and that is rear-facing or inward-facing cameras. That is the cameras that effectively watch the driver drive. And this, as you can imagine, has some issues around privacy, around intrusion, and basically just, do you really want to be watched while you're doing something? But the other side of it is that as we see more and more nuclear verdicts coming out of juries, basically pinning blame for crashes on truck drivers, these technologies, especially rear-facing cameras now, are becoming more and more popular in the industry because it's one more tool that the fleets can use in court to help, minimize, maybe even turn away a verdict.
Obviously, Alan, this is something that a fleet would be a pretty big proponent of, but the individual driver themselves could take issue with. And when you're talking about those nuclear verdicts, oftentimes they are handed down directly to the fleets instead of pinning a lot of the financial burden on the driver, right? So when you talk about how you get a driver on board with this, is there anything that these fleets are trying to do to say, hey, you know what? No, we really need your support on this? Or is it really just going to be up to that individual driver who, at the end of the day, if they don't want to be watched and they're working for a big fleet, has the option to maybe strike out on their own?
Right, or go to another fleet that doesn't use the technology. I think it's really a question of how do you roll it out, and this is what some of the people I talked to were referencing. You don't blanket this on a fleet all at one time and say, this is what we're doing and, like it or lump it. What you do is you find a group within your fleet and you test it and you take questions and you basically roll it out and build advocacy, quite honestly, for it. Very few people, drivers, care at all about outward-facing cameras. They understand how much good they can do for them in terms of basically absolving them of responsibility or guilt in certain situations. Occasionally, you can see it go the other way, and it'll show that they, in fact, did do something wrong. But by and large, drivers are okay with those cameras. It's the ones that face in that are taking a bit more getting used to. And I talked to Rob Penner from Bison, and Bison has 2,600 trucks, big fleet. They are using them for training. They are using them for driver fatigue. And Rob said that eventually they're going to be everywhere. It's just inevitable that these will become part of the technology package on trucks. Should they communicate them well? Sure, they should. But to some extent, Penner says, you know what? That doesn't really matter because there's this dichotomy between people accepting a forward-facing camera and objecting to a rear-facing camera. And his point is they're all really kind of the same thing. And so I think what you're seeing, though, and the newsletter really does have lots of different opinions here from 10th Street and from Workhound and a number of other folks that we talked with. So even though it's not the longest essay you could read, it definitely brings in a number of different opinions. And definitely, I guess I recommend it, but, I'm a little biased.
So I think one of the interesting things that this conversation brings up, at least for me, has to do with distracted driving and keeping a driver free of distractions, right? I know that, like, me personally, maybe this is just a me thing, maybe it's a female thing, I don't know. But, like, if I know that there's a camera watching me, I feel more self-conscious and then I'm more distracted, right? Like, I think about, like, the cameras at the self-checkout on the grocery, when I go to the grocery store. You know that they're watching me, I look up, I see my appearance, and I'm like, I look awful today, and now I'm distracted about how I look. Is that a threat that we're talking about, keeping a driver, making a driver more self-conscious about how they're moving, how they look, how they're holding themselves and carrying themselves, because now they know that their employer is continuously watching?
Ask the guy next to you. He looks like a fashion plate to me. I would think that if something were out of place, Anthony, you would be upset about it. But I get the point, Kaylee. I think that, yes, they are self-conscious about it. They're self-conscious in and typically it's after you make a move. I mean, you know, if you reach down to pick something up from the floor, or you reach over to do something, and it's like, oh, darn, they saw me. You know,
Yeah,
here's
like,
the thing,
you're not
though,
10 and 2. Like, they saw me not be 10 and 2.
exactly. Yeah. And you raise an interesting point. I don't know if it's 10 and 2, but I will tell you this. There are, you know, because it's part of a TMS system anyway, you know, the folks that are watching the recordings of these tapes are looking to see, you know, how did my driver do? How's my driver doing? And when they find something, they're pointing it out. And that's okay, except that, and we all know this from wherever we work, is that you're always sort of reminded of the thing you did wrong, where the things you do right, which might be 10 to 1 in terms of the number of things you do right, those don't get mentioned as much. So you've got a psychological thing here where you can sort of begin to build antipathy towards cameras, because they're only telling me when I do something wrong. They're not telling me that, hey, you just covered, you know, an 800-mile route and you did a great job. That doesn't get pointed out as much. So there's a little bit of a, you know, as a positive and negative reinforcement, that it doesn't help get these technologies accepted. I can remember as long as 4 years ago, a FedEx driver told me that these were just, you know, the worst things ever. And I don't know where FedEx is on using them. I didn't check, but the fact is that this kind of monitoring and really it could probably be done less obtrusively. And, you know, Lytx, which is one of the companies that does it, doesn't do biometric scanning. So they're not really looking at what your face is doing at any given time. And they're not recording, you know, any kind of, you know, geographic information of, you know, what you look like. They're just running a recorder. So I think that, you know, in some of the cases with passenger cars that have, you know, sort of level 2 autonomous driving or partial autonomous driving, they do have, you know, they're watching the driver's eyes, and they're basically, you know, taking account of how often the hands are off the wheel and how long the hands are off the wheel and that sort of thing. It's similar, but it's a little different. It's a little more subtle approach and a little less maybe invasive than, you know, some of the cameras that drivers are concerned about. It is interesting, though, guys, that both the American Transportation Research Institute and Workhound have done studies on driver impression about these things. We haven't seen the ATRI results yet, but Workhound and Max, I'm sorry, you guys probably know the
Max
CEO.
Farrell.
Yeah, Max Farrell. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. Max Farrell told me, he said we learned quite a bit from what drivers told us, and so again, it's kind of recounted in the newsletter. We have to. I don't know how much time we have here today, but I've got to tell you that ATA. You know, there's a whole section on other things that happened at the ATA last week. Autonomous was quite large, quite big in terms of, you know, floor space, and you know, you saw 3 different Aurora technology products, 1 from Volvo and 2 from PACCAR. You saw a Super Truck 2 concept from PACCAR that they worked on under a Department of Energy program. And then you didn't see anything at a Daimler display because there wasn't one, but they did have a truck in with Platform Science, and which also shared its space with the new Navistar S13 truck or powertrain that'll be out next year. So what did Daimler spend its money on? Well, there's always a mystery concert every year, and they always bring somebody that you've heard of in. The cool thing about this is that it is a mystery. There's like 3 people at Daimler that know who this artist is going to be in advance. And of course, there's a great guessing game that goes on the part of sort of, you know, the people who go to the concert. They always invite the media that covers them. So I did get to go. And when they pulled it back this week, it was Billy Joel. Outstanding. Oh my gosh. Guy's 73, but his voice is fabulous. The venue called the Rady Shell in San Diego is acoustically fabulous. And so that was kind of a neat treat from the conference. But I guess we know why they didn't buy a display.
Rumor has it we're going to have some good musical acts here next week for F3. But even better than that, rumor has it we're going to have some pretty great autonomous representation as well. And of course, Alan Adler, the star of the show, will be there, Alan.
Well, guys, I think F3 is going to be great. I do understand that we've got, you know, some autonomous reps. Interestingly enough, Plus and Nikola and Hyzon all offered rides out at ATA. I didn't take it because, well, I've been there and done that. But it's interesting that It's interesting that they did make those available, and obviously, especially Plus is really trying to position itself now as sort of something you can have today. You don't need to wait for the whole level 4, driver out kind of thing. They're working on, quite honestly, making money doing this.
Interesting to watch for sure, Alan. We will see you next week. Safe travels down here to Freight Alley, and take care for your weekends.
Okay, you too, guys.
Awesome. That was Alan Adler, and as Kaylee mentioned, he'll be here as well next week with F3. Once again, so should you. Right now, we're going to toss it over to Isaiah Buchanan with our first edition of Social Roundabout.